Do what thou will be the whole piece of law.
Welcome back, Parroting Puppets. I know your Eyesight TV's been going through a lot of strange behaviors recently, especially considering that nasty stuff you got last week. Just forget about it. It's probably not that important anyway. But I welcome you back to the Computer God's Secret Archive. And if me saying the words Computer God doesn't mean anything to you, I'd recommend checking the tab up there, as it's going to be slightly important to what we're talking about today, but it's not required. This is going to be a video on milk in general, with Francis E Dec as an addition to the deep dive into the milk void that we're going to do today. I'm going to be baptizing you all in this milk, fully immersing you in all there is to see and all things milk. You may think this is a boring topic, but I would dissuade you from thinking that, as I wanted to do a hybrid video. It's as much Francis E Dec as it is this small little iceberg that I found that I made some additions to. But this is just going to be a video on milk in general. And if just by looking at the iceberg you're a little confused, your interest is piqued, I would advise you to stick around and please subscribe, hit all those 4 buttons down below. Hype, I guess, is now a thing, so hype the video. I'm very hyped. I work in the milk industry, so this is going to be a very informative video from an insider, a corporate insider, a computer god parroting puppet. Oh, I'm probably gonna throw in so many work stories. But let me put some in context as to how I found this Computer God Secret Archive. Now, the archive link that I have been linking in my previous videos has been updated. There are all the new rants in image form. However, as I release my content, I have had a friend of mine so kindly transcribe all of these rants into text, obviously censoring out all the slurs, but you can fill in the blanks if you want a more accurate translation. I just want to provide something that is, 98% there. If you want to add all the slurs and racism and other stuff in there, feel free. But I'm very excited to cover this. And just before we get started, I know I made a post about how I wanted to not sound like RFK Jr. in here, but I'm gonna kind of have to do that. So I'm giving a text warning on the screen as well as a verbal warning for those who may just listen to this while doing something else. I am not a supporter of raw milk. I am not an endorser of raw milk. Anything that I talk about raw milk in this video is purely for informative and satirical purposes. I don't want to push anything that isn't backed by science. I'd be going against my own dairy overlords if I were to do so. And just, I guess, the computer gods guidelines, which I'm a little more afraid of. So just before we start, just know anyone I mention, I don't endorse. It's just where I found a lot of my information because I have to go digging in those dark holes to find those nice, creamy bits of info. Oh, we're already starting on the milk puns. Okay. But I think a good starting point is, first of all, the first layer of the iceberg. You all know icebergs, I'm not explaining it to you. Top of the sky. Our first entry is full fat milk. Now this is what you would also know as whole milk. This is also the progenitor product of everything else on the iceberg / rant itself. And keep that in mind, it's around 4% fat. Now whole milk has a lot of nutritional benefits. A lot of vitamins and minerals that we'll get into more specifically very later on in the iceberg. It may also have probiotics in it, may also have immunity boosting effects, but I'm getting ahead of myself. What you need to know now is that when it says full fat milk, it means whole milk 4%. That is premium cow's milk. That is what you're getting when you buy whole milk. Now, what do you get when you want to start dissecting milk a little more? Well, then you start to get cream. When you start to take apart the milk into its component parts, you get cream that's around 39 to 44% fat. This is what's used to make ice cream. It's used to make a lot of other stuff. It's the very nice, desserty part of the milk. It's the fat with most of the other stuff strained out. Continuing on, when I say state beverages, this is one I added myself. I'm actually surprised, because I found this through an image that I'm going to put on screen, that 20 out of the 32 states with official state beverages have milk as their state beverage, which I thought was very interesting. All these were added around the 70s to the 80s, and, sometimes you get the odd ones. Like Florida, of course, you would expect has orange juice, but Hawaii has something called awa, which I have no idea what it is. Or, Virginia, classic. Shout out to all my Virginia viewers. George Washington's rye whiskey. Classic. And you may have heard, moving on, that milk is good for your bones. And this is true. It's got a lot of calcium. It encourages bone growth, and it makes your bones overall more resilient. Now let's move into a little more the technicalities. What you can do with milk, entering into, your second layer. First of all, you have lactase and lactose. Now, these are two different things, but they both relate to the same thing. Let me explain. Lactose is the base. This is the protein that is in milk, and your body has an enzyme, which are things that break up proteins, to break apart lactose to derive energy from it. This is the lactase. Now, this dichotomy is important when thinking about milk, because milk contains lactose and your body contains lactase. This is what is able to process it, and we'll get into what a lac might mean later. But I also added something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I would assume very near and dear to the heart of the people that I know guaranteed will watch this video. I'm looking at you, people. I know who you are, and you know who you are. It sucks, doesn't it? It's a miracle it only costs like $1 at retail price. But anyway, let me tell the uninitiated as to what evaporated milk is. Evaporated milk is about 2.5 to 1.5 times as concentrated as milk. I like to call it more milk per milk, but that necessarily hasn't caught on yet. Now, evaporated milk, or as I'm probably going to call it out of force of habit throughout this video, evap. So if I slip into that, please just know that's my work coming back to bite me. Evaporated milk is a product that's used for a lot of things. You probably know it for tres leches, which is a nice beverage drink cake. I've never actually made it. Someone who's had tres leches, please tell me how it is, because the cans we send out, on the larger cans, they're called 610s. They're like, yeah, you can use 36 cups of flour and 1 can of all of this evaporated milk to make like 6 tres leches cakes. But anyway, that's the basis of evaporated milk. It may get more complicated in the future, but just know that that's the basis for now. Whole milk has the water evaporated out of it to condense the milk to about 1.5 to 2.5% concentration. Now, another one that involves a modification of whole milk is skimmed milk, or as you may know it, skim milk. Skim milk is a milk that has basically all the fat removed from it. It's 0.1% fat or less. And this is achieved by using a separator, which will saw out all of the fat and turn it into cream, which we've already discussed, and leave you with skimmed milk, which is effectively just milk minus the fat. People argue that it's healthier, but there's a lot of new research that says, you might want to be drinking the whole milk instead. So I'm going to leave that to the people who actually do science with milk. I'm just a person who tests it. But since we have most of the base, I'm going to read for the first time that anyone has put this into non-artificial intelligence words that I know of, a rant which I have been searching for since I knew it existed, and I have been so happy to find it in the Computer God's secret archive. So, for history, I will read to you Francis E Dec's pasteurized milk conspiracy. And just as a little bonus, I didn't read through this before I record it. So when you hear me say it, just know that I'm going to be as shocked as you are. So without further ado, we're going to do this in little parts. I'm going to alternate between the iceberg and the pasteurized milk conspiracy, just so the iceberg people who came here for the iceberg stay entertained, and the people who came here for the Francis E Dec stay entertained. But I think this is a nice holistic experience because you get both sides. You get me, who's actually part of the industry and can actually, tell you stuff that's not confidential. And then we have Francis E Dec, who's not part of the industry, is a hack fraud lawyer that we found out in the last one. Please go watch it. I spent 50 hours making it, and like 20 people watched it, as I predicted. But anyway, the pasteurized milk conspiracy. I feel it's so appropriate that my lips get to grace this for the first time. Continues and starts, quote, "Communist gangster computer god's secret, intensified repetition of fabricated historical crisis syndrome. Computer god completely concocted and manipulated World War I, and in 20 years repeated as deadly, phony World War II. As an unbelievable cover-up for millions of USA military men with unbelievable secret bribe pay. Many of you parroting puppets reading this received this felonious bribe pay. Were sent all over the world. Even apoetic black people. Very distant South Pacific islands, North Pacific Eskimo Aleutian Islands, and even all over Africa, for worldwide implantation of all Frankenstein controls for the overall plan. Eternal Frankenstein living death slavery worldwide to explore and control the entire universe. Because of the limited space and weight in space travel, Computer God uses much lightweight compact synthetics worldwide, substituting many fake, phony, worldwide shortages to impose synthetics worldwide, substituting much synthetic plastic clothing, building materials, airplane, ship, and even auto parts, furniture, even water paints, and even food, margarine, saccharin, meat, cereals, and even nature's complete and perfect food for millions of years from the advent of mammals, namely milk. Legless cripple, drugged in his stretcher, new gifted Rosenfeld, wrote, right, and even the unchallengeable edict of Computer God parroting puppet. All farmers must travel to the nearest government-subsidized switching station with their pure fresh milk to have it immediately switched for degenerated, with most cream nutrients robbed, watered down, stale, boiled to destroy most of the remaining cream and other nutrients. New, pasteurized milk. Oh boy. Oh boy. It's everything I wanted it to be and more. So, let's go back to the iceberg for a second. It may help us flesh out some of Francis's ideas. First of all, what is Francis saying here? Well, it's looking like it's kind of what I wanted to avoid going later on into this, but I will edit it as best I can to try and make it so that the Computer God does not take notice that I'm raiding its secret archives. Well, World War I was fake. Basically, there was just one big world war, supposedly. Well, there was one big war that was repeated, basically denying that technology ever changed. And he also has to be the victim because, remember, he served in the Air Force, so he was kind of scammed because he's like, oh, this milk is poisoning me, but I'm also a military member, so he has to loop in the entire U.S. military. And he's like, why do we have to go to all these, corner of the world places, especially the Aleutian Islands where the ancient Slovenes were destroyed by the Computer God? By the way, if at any point none of this makes sense in the Francis E Dec part, I would go catch up with the history of the Computer God. That would basically solve all your questions, at least a little bit. But by going on and going forward, you consent to either know all the previous context and know about the Computer God's grand conspiracy, or you choose to remain ignorant because you're just here for the milk part, which I completely understand. But something that Francis did predict was the use of synthetic things. Now, little did he know that this would be a mark of the culture. Basically everything nowadays is made out of plastic or oil, or imagine what he would have said when he sees all these studies that come out and say like, oh yeah, we can't test for the effects of microplastics because there is no control group now. When you read things like that, you're like, maybe I do live in a Computer God hell world. I certainly think it when I read things like, oh yeah, we can't test for microplastics because there's no control group that doesn't have microplastics in it. Imagine Francis E Dec knew about microplastics. It would put so much of this to shame. Or like the fact that we're 3D printing houses, or just all these substitutes that are oil derivatives, which is just plastic's progenitor. I would love to see him go insane. But namely, he puts a focus specifically on milk. And I'm going to talk about Roosevelt a little later. And by the way, when he says Rosenfeld, reminder, he means Roosevelt. Now, I don't know which Roosevelt he's talking about, as two were president, but with the context clues given, I believe he's talking about FDR. And he talks about this process that destroys milk. And you may think this is a little insane that he would say it in this way, but this is actually a movement that's been going on for a long time, especially in more rural communities or people who are predisposed to alternative medicine and alternative food. Those are the people who are most likely to already have subscribed to what Francis is talking about. And what does he mean when he says pasteurization? Why would there be any fears of destroying this? Well, going back to layer 3 of the milk iceberg, I want to bring up something that I am personally afflicted with, even though I still drink milk on the regular, sorry everyone, is lactose intolerance. Now remember when I mentioned before that lactase and lactose are two different things. Lactose is the protein that milk contains, and lactase is the enzyme that breaks down the protein. Lactose intolerance is lacking lactase in your body. Usually you'll see people take Lactaid or another lactase enzyme supplement, and that's exactly what it is. If you take Lactaid and you're lactose intolerant, you are just eating lactase enzyme, which is why they recommend you take it with your first sip of milk. Otherwise, it won't properly activate and it may not be as effective as you thought. The next entry I'm going to correct. It is not lactase-free milk. I think they meant lactose-free milk, because when I was looking up anything for lactase-free milk, I couldn't find anything. So I'm going to go with lactose-free milk because it syncs very well with lactose intolerance. Lactose-free milk is exactly what it says, which is milk that is free already, when you buy it, of the protein lactose. Now, how do you think they do this? Well, it's the exact same way that I've kind of been alluding to this entire time, which is, or you could probably guess it, is they just put lactase in the milk and then ship it off. And by the time you buy it, it will have already broken down all the lactose proteins in the milk. So you're left with milk with no lactose in it. And if you're wondering what it tastes like, because I grew up tasting it, imagine it's milk that's a little sweeter because it breaks down in excess sugar, and it's a little more empty. I don't know how to describe it. It just doesn't have as strong a body, but it's a little sweeter. And also in this tier, we have something that I think Francis E Dec kind of latched onto, which is plant milk. Now, this gets a little more insidious as we go down, but this is, your almond milk, your coconut milk, your oat milk, all these things that are technically ways to drink milk that are technically vegan, but it's milk derived from plants, and all of these things are more artificial. And I think this theme of artificiality is something that Francis likes to latch onto, and I feel that these existed back then, but you see them a lot more nowadays. And as someone who grew up lactose intolerant, they are extremely pushed, mainly because they're cheaper than lactose-free milk, and it's better for you, quote unquote, is what I was told by my doctor, is because you don't have to deal with the rest of the milk digestion. It's basically just synthetic milk. But I want to continue. I don't want to get held up on this. But keep the concept of plant-based artificial milk in the back of your mind, because there's something a lot more insidious that I know the people watching this are already tasting in their mouths when I say such a thing as a more insidious plant milk. But I want to continue. Raw milk. Now, this is a really big one. Now, this one also kind of ties into pasteurization. So I'm basically going to cover both of them at once. Raw milk is milk directly out of the cow. Basically, from the udder to a bucket, you drink it. That is raw milk. And based on where you are, it is variously legal to sell or procure it. Check the laws of your state or country, depending if this sounds interesting to you, but I'm telling you, it really doesn't differ much scientifically or taste-wise. But some people really do subscribe to the difference. And I'm not promoting that, as I said before. I'm just trying to inform you about what it is. Raw milk contains basically the same things that the milk you see on the shelves contains. A lot of vitamins, a lot of calcium, a lot of other nice minerals. And I then kind of want to transfer to pasteurization, because this is what I know most about. This is the process invented by Louis Pasteur, which Francis E Dec has already mentioned for me, where effectively what you do is there's two methods of doing it, where you either scald it really fast, aka you bring it up to 190 degrees Fahrenheit for effectively like 1 or 2 seconds and then cool it back down, or the one that is more prominent, which is you bring it up to 70 degrees Celsius for around 15 to 30 seconds, and they have these loops that it has to go through, and it times it itself effectively as you pump it through at a constant flow rate. But what does pasteurization do? Pasteurization removes, first of all, the phosphatase in the raw milk. Second of all, it sterilizes any bacteria that would have been in there. Now, third is the point that is more up for debate and what may determine whether you are a raw milk consumer or not. because people who are advocates of raw milk will say that this destroys a lot of the vitamins, minerals, and beneficial things that you would ever gain out of milk, which is why they would advocate you drink raw milk instead, because all of that remains intact. Things that we will get to later on the iceberg, I will point out whether this is destroyed by pasteurization. And by the way, the proper way to say it is pasteurization, because it was invented by Louis Pasteur, not pasteurization, but I'm gonna use both interchangeably because I'm not that pedantic. But that is the main thing that Francis E Dec focusing on, as well as people who advocate for raw milk, and Francis is probably one of those people, which is, well, I'm not there yet, can't say that. Last thing on the iceberg, cows carry tuberculosis. Now, this is another misconstruing of actual real facts, because it's kind of like avian influenza, or like avian influenza is the closest, but another thing I kind of came up with is, you remember the Impossible Whopper from a while ago? And people are like, oh, it contains so much estrogen, you're gonna turn into a girl. But it's actually plant estrogen and doesn't really have an effect on you or your body really in any way. Cows carrying tuberculosis is, yes, they carry bovine tuberculosis, which is a strain of human tuberculosis that is specifically for cows and is specialized for cows, which means communication to humans is rare, but it's still technically true. You're not going to get it unless you're like interacting with cows on a daily basis, but it's technically true. Oh, and one more thing about raw milk. Raw milk contains basically everything that the cow contains. You get milk from a sick cow, you get bad milk. You get milk from, an Amish cow. State loves to send those when we have to read stuff, it's got like 20 billion bacteria in it because they don't use modern techniques that I assume Francis would snub his nose up at. But anyway, speaking of Francis, let's get back to what he has to continue to say about pasteurized milk and how this may continue to guide us through the iceberg.
At the same time, Computer God created and proliferated gigantic milk dairy companies with degenerate, stale, factory-processed, quote-unquote, milk and milk products. All secretly new high holy K kosher by Computer God parroting puppet, deformed Jewish fancy alias Louis Pasteur is religion, like co-skeletalization. All of these gigantic milk companies with unbelievable, fabulous goy bribe subsidies, with endless news media advertising, gifts, prices, etc., controlled solely by Computer God, force hundreds of Slovene milk farmers bankrupt on this Long Island alone. So tens of thousands of milk farmers all over this country, because of the tremendous expense and work of shipping their fresh, pure, wholesome milk to the switching station, and the Computer God gangster government subsidized gangster competition of the communist government subsidized parasitical communist giant Jewish milk corporations. Countrywide, another example of tens of thousands of independent free enterprises, businessmen destroyed by gangster government Roosevelt communism. A few years later, Computer God, by unchallengeable government edict, ordered ultra-homogenized vitamin D synthetic milk to make the stale, watered down with poisonous acids added synthetic milk taste better. Synthetic milk flavoring is added, and the Computer God calls this synthetic flavoring vitamin D. Parentheses, these said poison acids in the countrywide synthetic milk quote-unquote burns away your body, bringing about extremely thin bodies, from baby head, even by edict. Free in the schools, all life in this country. You drink these poisonous kosher synthetic milk products, bringing about today's thin broomstick population more ideal for Computer God to use in the endless stairway to the stars. End parenthesis. Like synthetic milk, all synthetics are degenerative and unstable, automatically self-destructive. All are poisonous to all of nature. All are unbelievably complex and very expensive substitutes with secret fabulous gangster government doled out subsidies. Even to this day, all forced upon by an ignorant, unsuspecting, terrorized population by decree.
I finally get to mention it since Francis brought it up. I'm so excited. Anyway, the Computer God created these giant milk companies. Now, I assume one of them he's going to talk about is Dairy Farmers of America, or DFA. This is the giant American dairy company. Even if you don't know many of the other regional ones, you probably know Dairy Farmers of America. They are everywhere, probably because in America, they are the largest dairy conglomerate in the country. And they have relations to the iceberg at some points in it, but stay tuned. they were given subsidies, and I don't even want to get into the term. I don't want to get into some of the terms he uses because it just kind of feels like you're like dipping your hand into the, 4chan lingo, and you're like, I don't know if I want to fish around in here for too long before some piranha bites off my hand or the computer god sees that I'm here, so I'm just going to skip over it. He's saying pasteurization is a religion because it's pushed so hard. All of these companies are getting subsidies from the government. They get all of this advertising gifts, discounts for selling pasteurized milk, and it's sold by the computer god, and this is all just to force all of these nice Slovene farmers in Long Island to go bankrupt with their nice, pure, fresh, wholesome milk, and they have to send it to these switching stations where they presumably just dump it down the drain and replace it with nice, evil computer god milk. And by the way, yes, I am going to be using Kanye to say the things that I don't want to say because people liked it. People liked it in the last one, so I'm going to try and find a different instance, but they're probably going to repeat because he probably is not caught on camera saying it that many times, but we'll see. He also says that FDR destroyed a bunch of enterprises, which isn't wrong. I mean, considering Francis E Dec is part of the camp that considers FDR, the next thing since the American Joseph Stalin. I mean, I wouldn't put it past him, Roosevelt communism. By the way, just a reminder, Rosenfeld is the true name, quote unquote, of the Roosevelt family because Francis E Dec wants to make them more kosher-bosher names, if you catch my drift. But I finally get to, have my
Are we the baddies
moment because at these switching stations, to make these synthetic milks taste better, you add these poisonous acids like vitamin D and all these other flavoring, which is weird to think about because we were always told, like, hey, this is like super concentrated vitamin D, and if you, have so much as like a drop on your tongue, you just like bite it because of an overdose, which honestly kind of fits Francis's narrative, but I don't think drinking synthetic milk spiked with vitamin D is going to, cause extremely thin bodies and slowed development and, this pawn population that you want to send into space with your super high-tech starship inside out planets. And I specifically think that I know what Francis is talking about, because when he says, all are unstable, all are poisonous to all of nature and are unbelievably complex and very expensive, and they're only affordable because of subsidies, I feel like I know what he's talking about. But I can't say it because it's on the iceberg. I want to talk about it so bad. But, okay, I can't continue anymore. I'm not going to the next clip yet. We have to get to my favorite portion of the iceberg, the part where we finally get to the super evil stuff you probably don't know about. So, this first one I'm probably going to mispronounce, but I'm going to take my best shot at it. This entry is called cellulated oligosaccharides. Now, this is a sugar that is built into specifically human breast milk, but is also found in small quantities of other milks throughout the animal kingdom. And these are related to the second one, which is immunity boosting. These cellulated oligosaccharides are basically tailor-made to bolster your intestinal flora from the ground up. They're meant to nurture your gut biome and boost your immune system. This is something that raw milk supporters claim is destroyed by pasteurization, but I could not find any evidence to support it besides GetRawMilk.com with their t-shirts, and GetRawMilk.com was actually super helpful. I'm not endorsing them, but I am saying they exist because they are my primary source for all of the, I don't want to say non-scientific, but the close to scientific information that I got. The other one, before I get to the one that Francis is probably talking about, is lactoferrin, which is a part of milk that helps transfer iron, and it's why milk is so high in iron content. This is also something that the raw milk crowd claims is destroyed by pasteurization. The main reason why you would want this is because it increases the iron content in your milk, making it more nutritious than if it were not pasteurized at all, allegedly. But I can strike fear into the hearts of lab techs everywhere when I say the next entry is filled milk. Now, you may have never heard of this before, and I added it myself for this exact reason. because filled milk fits all of these labels that I have said at work multiple times. It is degenerative, unstable, synthetic, unbelievably complex, expensive, poisonous to all of nature, and flavored to taste better even though it still tastes horrible. Now, what is filled milk? Well, I have an eternal grudge with Robert H. Bundis solely because of this invention. Filled milk, from the patent, is a mixture containing non-fat milk solids and vegetable fat simulating whole milk or cream. It can also contain flavors and colors for taste or functional purposes. Now, what does that mean in non-patent speak? It means they separate out the milk into skimming cream, of course, and then what they redo is they add soybean oil to make up for the 4% fat that they extracted into cream. Now, if that sounds horrible, it is exactly as bad as you would imagine, if not worse. If I had to give you a simulation of what to do, take half a cup of skim milk and probably like a tablespoon of your vegetable oil of choice, put them together, mix them up really good, and then drink it. That's exactly what it tastes like. And by the way, this can also be evaporated. So, evaporated milk's usual like 6 to 7% fat can be substituted with 6 to 7% fat soybean oil. It is it is exactly what Francis E Dec says, and I feel like he picked up filled milk once and then wrote this, because I was so close to writing something along these lines when I was saying like, oh, I'm gonna have to write this myself. I was this close to writing almost this exact same thing. I hate it so much. It is my least favorite thing on the planet. I am the #1 evaporated milk and filled milk hater in the world. Yeah, the patent's like, oh, we'll have filled milk having full flavor and a rich mouthfeel. It's not. It's disgusting. It's the equivalent of margarine for when you're baking. Like, oh, we're gonna bake this into a cake or something, or like, you won't be able to notice the taste once all the soybean oil's evaporated off and we just leave the milk. It's gross. It's disgusting. I hate it so much. But now that I've got that out of my system, and Robert H. Bundis is probably long gone, I want to cover something that I originally thought this was going to be about. And now that I've read it, I'm kind of disappointed that it wasn't, so I put it on this iceberg so I got to talk about it anyway. What I'm talking about is the milk case. Now, this could probably be a video all on its own, but I'm going to give you a brief explanation. So, remember Dairy Farmers of America, the largest conglomerate, government-funded, subsidized by computer god, planned prices, whatever. Remember Dairy Farmers of America? They're involved in this. So, in 1971, when Richard Nixon was president, as is usually the case for farmers that are producing something baseline, like milk or corn is another big one, or flour, or basically any perishable product, they were lobbied, or some may say facing strong pressure from dairy producers and farmers seeking higher federal prices for milk. Basically, you know, minimum wage, how in your state it's probably something around, you know, $7.25 to $15 depending. Well, there's the same thing for milk, because states may have their own prices for milk, but at the end of the day, the federal price is still going to be the lowest one. You know, nobody's honestly walking around saying they get paid $7.25 an hour unless you're a waiter or a waitress. Have fun, and then you're probably getting paid less. But anyway, the milk case involved DFA and Nixon in the sense of, well, and also as Secretary of the Treasury, John Connolly. It was a PQP type deal, because Nixon accepted large contributions from AMPI, DFA, and some other minor milk producers to effectively get the price of milk raised when he got elected. And in case, sorry, I forgot to explain, AMPI is the Associated Milk Producers Incorporated, aka the second or maybe the biggest dairy cooperative, the second being DFA or the first. I don't know. They're both relatively the same size in my head. And, you know, they got as blatant as a representative that was also a lawyer for AMPI just said, like, here's $100,000 in cash to Nixon's personal attorney. And nobody raised an eyebrow at this, except for when they found out about it. At which point they persecuted. Oh yeah, they're the victims here. No, they prosecuted John Connolly, and he was basically the scapegoat for the entire thing. They said, oh, he got $10,000. Which, yeah, don't look at Nixon's $100,000 that he allegedly got for this. And Francis E Dec enjoyers, another Jacobson, has hit the story. Because the prosecution to get Connolly convicted relied heavily on testimony from Jake Jacobson, which is a lawyer for these large milk cooperatives, who allegedly made the payments, but Connolly didn't actually have any of the charges stick, and they never charged Nixon because they don't just charge sitting presidents, I guess. They just waited. I don't know, man. It's like, why wasn't Nixon ever charged for, the $100,000 he got from that one lawyer? Who knows? But the federal price of milk was raised, and that's all that matters, right, guys? Anyway, let's get into some historical revisionism. What do you have to say about that, Francis E Dec?
Now, this worst gangster communist melting pot is so inundated, the entire Earth planet inevitably all gradualness to one world communism, making the entire planet Earth deadly unlivable, so that the very near future, simple, apoietic, mixed race population will willingly volunteer to go to the distant planets and their many moons in order to quote-unquote survive, and thereby increase present secret populations of all planets and their moons, and the endless stairway to the stars for the overall plan of the computer god. For many decades, the worldwide endless and countless trillions of dollars so expended in one little country, Germany in the 1940s, but kosher-bosher this time, National Socialism, euphemism for communism, in a few years during World War II and experiments for and building the stairway to the stars, over 6 million people expended, exterminated, all of them with plastic surgered split-seam bodies for Frankenstein controls. Parentheses, I saw secret films of these people, alive and even dead, stacked as cordwood, being made into preserved human meat, even soap and shoe leather by the obvious, vicious, unfathoming, worst deadly gangster worldwide disease, new doctors, psychonaturist, and even dentists. Gifted professionalists, this deadly gangster Jewish medical profession disease that spreads its entire life secretly, systematically, feloniously butchering and murdering the population so that all people are dead or useless at age 70. We're solely qualified to do such butchery murder experiments, solely as parroting puppets. This Jewish kosher black people disease never fathomed it was for a worldwide communist gangster computer god, and even though it was unintelligible, SS rabbis, Colonel Eichmann, Mengele, etc., talking to their Jewish head, instructing them who to butcher and murder. All of the large extermination, parentheses, experimentation camps were in the heart of World War II, German, occupied Poland and Slovenia. Computer God took millions of human, pure, white Polish women in these camps to marry and interbreed with kosher Jewish Germans. All secretly, like my letters kept a wide open secret. The computer God picked no Mengele, Colonel Doctor, 30-year-old picked anything, but as is parroting puppet. The lower, the white women, ruddy or befreckled, for slave farm labor by the millions. Virtually all of the guinea pig exterminated were the highest mentally white Polish men. They composed the most of the 6 million Polish people exterminated by Germany. Computer God concocted and manipulated history, news media, and thousands of computer God black people parroting puppet Hollywood movies cover up these true facts with falsehoods. The Kanye, like his black people cousins, are not fit mentally for space travel experiments. The computer gods so planned to exterminate the entire Polish Slavonic population of World War II, German, occupied Poland. At the same time, have millions of guinea pigs to build the stairway to the stars, with million of mongrel Germans, the Jewish Roman Empire. I gotta stop.
I gotta stop him at some point. I have to. I legitimately have to. Otherwise, I'm going to explode. I don't even know what to say. I don't even think I want to explain it. This is like the rant that I skipped a while ago just because it would be so heavily censored, but I don't even know what to say. I'm just gonna leave it there. It's a complete fabrication. First of all, not endorsing it, but just the Roman Empire clip, it was polls, because remember, he's anti-Semitic, so they have to be the perpetrators, not the victims, and he also doesn't like communists, and obviously he wouldn't like National Socialism, so it kind of blends well in Francis E Dec's mind that he would have something like this, which is just kind of disgusting. But moving on, I bet you had forgotten about the milk iceberg. Let me deliver some kind of scary thing that is technically true if you don't think about it very much. The next entry is raw milk and potatoes is a nearly full diet lacking only vitamin B12. Now, this is looking at it through just the nutritional perspective. Technically, this is true, and to get all these things together, you would need ungodly amounts of both of them to hit your daily margins. But it's also, I would feel comfortable saying that this is kind of like just drinking those, meal replacement shakes every single day. And how they recommend that you still have at least one solid meal per day. I feel like that's what it has to be, because it was genuinely mind-blowing to find out that it is, to some degree, actually genuinely what you could eat your entire life if you were like that dedicated to just milk. But before we get into, the finality of the milk iceberg, let's let Francis finish his thought, because I know I kind of cut him off in the middle of something. But after that, we'll go into the last of the iceberg, and then you'll know all there is to know about esoteric, deep milk. What's at the bottom of the raw tank? Ooh, it's all dark and scary with agitator blades, and I'm just gonna read it.
There were few 100,000
Kanye
exterminated, but they would believe in nothing. Deadly gangster communist like New Lenin and Trotsky. They to death could not see a bubkiss. The Jewish Scheckelgruber, corporal government as their rulers. Even to death, they screamed they would exterminate all the National Socialists they could. The Communist Socialist would rule
Kanye,
Jewish
Germany.
In addition, hundreds of thousands of these communist
Jewish
pragmatically were made capos, intimate trusted sergeants. These deadly gangsters already sentenced to death for their crimes. As capos, these beat, tortured, and even nurtured the guinea pig Polish people. These Jewish capos were given the private rooms and travel privileges at the camps. Parentheses. This is much better than, quotes, highest military school reopened, at that time solely for me, Mr. Francis E Dec, as a fool's paradise and an insidious death trap, solely for me, Mr. Francis E Dec, in this worst melting pot, USA lem. Yes, I saw secret files of many of the 6 million Polish people expended, all with plastic surgered split-seam bodies, lay on your side and see the almost invisible surgery seam down your belly. I don't even know if I could say that. And under your private parts, end parenthesis, all with very wide surgered mouths, disguised for broomstick USA-lum, government subsidy factory protein acid cow foods, all butter is aceto range color, camouflage with synthetic quote-unquote milk protein white powder, chemical color and flavor, melt in water. Jewish, untouchable, parroting puppet con artist gangster disease professionalists are retreating from
black people,
African cousins all over the world, especially in the computer god concocted and manipulated school of slanted truths and falsehoods, lies, indoctrination for one world communism integration. In this country already, there are hundreds of thousands of
black
doctors, dentists, psychiatrists, chiropractors, surgeons, nurses, etc., which is absolute proof that the Jewish professions are unfit, parroting puppet worst deadly gangster disease, like their Jewish cousins. These are black gifted professionalists, have virtually little or no clientele, but all of them, both the
Kanye
and his
black
cousins, received this communist gangster government secret.
It's just another one of those. I don't even want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Communism is Bolshevik. Wow. What a new idea. Wow. A certain group perpetrated... I don't want to... Okay. He actually talks about milk at the end. Remember, yes, the computer god slaves are working to perpetrate these horrible things. Slaves of the computer god, all of these parroting puppets are perpetrating these things, and the computer god robot operating cabinet leaves its seam upon you when it puts its Frankenstein controls in your body, and that's why you have that little line there. If you're a guy, you know what he's talking about. All of it's just so wrong. Oh, it's like a car accident. Just looking at it is just it's hard to look away. I was so entranced when reading it. I feel like that one genuinely got to me. The computer god wants to keep all of the people weak, and all butter is acidic in color, and it's trying to camouflage the synthetic milk in it and the chemical flavor, and it just sounds like you got really bad butter. Except ours was claimed to be too acidy, so I mean, whatever. But it's still like number one in the country, I guess. Also, if you're black, you don't get customers. Racism, anti-Semitism. Yeah, this is a Francis E Dec rant if I've ever seen one. I hope the milk iceberg can relieve us of this. Oh, darn. Okay, how do I say this without perpetrating anything that I don't believe? Well, I can't do that, so just know, going into this section, I am telling you pure historical facts, and any inferences you may make off of those historical facts are purely yours. I'm not trying to lead you into any premeditated conclusions that may or may not be true. So, Victor Rothschild's only speeches to the House of Lords. Now, you may know the Rothschilds from the memes online, like, the Rothschilds making sure that whenever I go to record a video, my nose gets stuffed up in a way that is literally impossible for me to clear, so I just kind of sound nasally for the rest of the video after reading the rant. That's like, the guy from Lord of the Rings pondering his orb. Now, they're actually a large banking family, and also those who notice may notice something else nestled in the early life section, but I don't think that's very important right now. He made only 2 speeches. Both of these were in 1946. Possibly this may be why Francis is obsessed with World War II more in this rant, is because the first one is to ask the UK to assist the migration of settlers into British colonies in the Middle East, in an area that is very hotly contested right now. And the other was a mandate to implement the pasteurization of raw milk in as many parts of the UK as possible. Now, the contents of this speech, I'm not going to go over. This video is long enough already. But pasteurization was then implemented in around 70% of the UK's milk. And if you'll remember, this is like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle Time, and it makes sense for him to advocate for these things because there are things like the swill milk scandal, which I guess I will, kind of throw in right now as a little bonus entry, which is in the UK, it is effectively the same thing that happened with Upton Sinclair's The Jungle in the meat industry in the United States. It was, milk got contaminated in some pretty disgusting ways, and people were suffering some pretty horrible side effects, namely with their children. But they also never banned raw milk, which is why you can get raw milk basically all around the world. And the reason why it's on this entry's on there is, my guess is anti-Semitism, mainly because I had to cut out the very bottom entry, which involves Fidel Castro and JFK, which I didn't really want to go into, mainly because, tell you what, if I hit 100K, I will do it. Yeah, if I just get 1,000 times what I already have right now, I'll cover it. I don't even know how I would, but I will, I guess. Secondly, big food and big pharma. I feel everyone knows these, but big food is a little more relevant nowadays, especially with the rise of ultra-processed foods and Francis E Dec kind of predicting such a thing, especially with the most recent dietary guidelines coming out. It is not hard to see that there's a lot of money in food, and people have a very vested interest in keeping things the way they are. So I think I'm just going to say this one is a little self-explanatory, with Francis E Dec's giant dairy corporations being kind of self-evident. Now, J.D. Rockefeller lobbying for pasteurization. If you don't know, in the United States, much like in the UK, pasteurization was not the gold standard. It had to be lobbied for and pressured by Rockefeller, which, if you don't know, J.D. Rockefeller is a large part of conspiracy theories, especially involving big whatever. It all somehow goes back to the Rockefellers and the Rockefeller tree. Wait, no, that's something else. But it got its legal start there, and by using a bunch of his money, he got it passed. It's kind of like how... You know what? Another cool entry you can have at the bottom, because it's another weird one that I remember. It's like Al Capone's weird obsession with milk, about how he wanted everyone to have like good milk, so he used the mob powers to make milk super accessible, easy to get, safe. Guess just W for milk, I suppose. And then there's the last one that I put on there myself, which is the Milk Wars. Now, this could also probably be its own video, but at many points in the US history, there have been farmers having problems. And when farmers have problems, it's usually not a good time. And in 1932 until about 1940, so basically it stopped when Japan, did their little gamer moment, I suppose, a bunch of milk farmers were about to lose their homes. Now, you may ask, why were they about to lose their homes? Well, this is mainly because the federal price of milk is not very good, and people were metaphorically drowning because they couldn't produce enough milk. And they took up arms, picket signs, and began to block roads. This starts taking place in Minnesota and North Dakota, and this starts out as a small strike. These people are lovingly referred to as holidayers by the papers, and in just North Dakota alone, especially just after only 3 days, it had spread to over 36 counties in North Dakota, and this was able to cut off all dairy exports or imports 24 hours a day. Now, don't think that this is just bleak for the farmers. This is also really bleak for the cows, mainly because they were being turned loose into these barren cornfields and just not really having many good options for nutrition. And since you may not realize, but milk really only has a 2-week period where it's good if it's pasteurized, it began to close down the milk to a lot of major American cities like Atlanta and New York City. And New York is a major dairy state. That's, I think, why Francis E Dec was saying, like, all these Polish Slovenes of New York are being put out of business by these large dairy conglomerates. But it quickly spreads, not just in the major cities, but then to entire states like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware. And they had to, pull extra weight because North Dakota wasn't going to put in their share, Minnesota wasn't going to put in their share, and more of these states began to threaten a strike, or as they called it, a milk holiday. And this wasn't limited to just milk. It was also limited to other produce. And it sparked a general milk strike all the way in Great Britain in the next month of October. This is taking place in September, by the way. It also moved to Norway, and this isn't a continuous thing, right? It moves on and off depending on the conditions, but it continues into 33, where the actual first sparks of this alleged war begin to fly as these people, now armed with more advanced weapons, now with rudimentary explosives as well as their clubs, they begin to face off in major cities, especially because the mob is a major thing at this time. And they start to face off with police and mobsters, and it just goes off the rails. Like, the farmers begin to taint their milk with kerosene or other fluids that aren't fit for consumption, and the government responds by then bringing out, the National Guard, and then they start firing on protesters, and then this escalates to the farmers beginning to bomb things, and these just continue. It continues over a bunch of major cities for the next effectively 8 years, mainly because nothing could ever be resolved. And there's like a really interesting angle where there's kind of a labor union aspect to it, because they're wondering if it's even like a thing that they could get, you know, a union for just milk producers as a whole. But then with no solutions in sight, it starts to become a, hey, what if we all seize the means of milk production instead of just having a union? What if we were all communists? And then, you know, prime first Red Scare period, oh man, the communists are at work with something. And you may be wondering, how is this put to an end? Because this sees through many historical events, namely the Dust Bowl being the new one. Saw Prohibition come and go, saw the New Deal, and in case you're wondering, it was mainly the Great Depression. And this really only ended with the passing of the Milk Code, which stated that people who transported milk and salesmen of milk were entitled to $20 a week with a 4% commission. And that's in 1930s money. That's pretty handsome. And wholesale drivers received 1.5%, and inside worker wages saw a boost to $18 a week. Sounds pretty good to be a milk producer. And truckers in general saw their salaries boosted, in some cases 40 cents per hour. But this basically continued until everyone's demands were, if not met, negotiated on. And eventually the strikes dried up in Wisconsin, but North Dakota held out the longest. And the milk wars really truly did end with Al Capone in Alcatraz in 1939, after a bunch of involved mobsters were prosecuted. Al Capone being one that was more indirect, and I don't really see it mentioned that he might have gotten imprisoned and prosecuted for the milk case, or sorry, the milk wars, but it's definitely a contributing factor. But anyways, I hope you leave this video with a sense of knowing way too much about milk, and the next time someone asks you, would you like a glass of milk, you can say, what kind? Or just some fun fact from this video. I love milk. It's a dairy industry is not something I thought I would get into, but I really do enjoy it. And I can say that wholeheartedly, even though it does take up a lot of my time. But anyway, I want to thank you for watching. Very, very much thank you for making it to the end if you made it this far. Only about 10% of people do, so welcome to the 10% club. I'll give you a free glass of milk post this milk. If you made it this far, I almost guarantee you'll like my other stuff. I would recommend the Francis E Dec playlist that I linked earlier. I know this is kind of a hybrid video, but I really do think I made the best of both worlds work. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And in this world, it's milk or be milked.